Greetings in the name of the Most High Yahuwah and his Son, Yahusha, to the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad. I am Brother Hiram, and in this video I am going to give you 5 reasons why David did not eat the showbread on the Shabbat. So let's go. So why does this matter? When counting the Shabbat from each renewal of the moon or new moon, it will always land on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of the lunar month. Counting it this way allows the Shabbat to harmonize with the new moons and synchronize with the festivals as we see in the scriptures. Now I say as we see in the scriptures because in every single case when we see the Shabbat, and it is identifiable by a date. Now, when I say identifiable by a date, perhaps it's in close proximity to a feast day, and we already know the exact dates of the feast days. And so when we are able to put a date on a seventh-day Sabbath that we see in the scriptures, because let's say that it's in close proximity to something that has a hard date attached to it, then in every single case, it lands on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th of the lunar month. Now, the significance of those 4 numbers is for the 8th, that means that you have the new moon day, and then you have the 6 working days after that, and then the 7th-day Sabbath. That would put it on the 8th. And then the 15th, that would, as I said here, synchronize it with the festivals where the 7th-day Sabbath would begin both the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Tabernacles. And so that's the significance of the 15th, and then the 22nd would close out both of those festivals, with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You'd have a Shabbat the day after the last day of Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then you would have a 7th-day Shabbat the day after the last day of Tabernacles, and that's actually called the 8th-day Convocation. And so we see that synchronizing of the 7th-day Sabbath with the festivals. This is something that we actually see in the scriptures. Okay, we don't see the 7th-day Sabbath conflicting with the festival days. We never see a 7th-day Sabbath landing right in the middle of the Feast of Unleavened Bread or the Feast of Sukkot, but at the beginning on the 15th. So there is a popular teaching among the Israelites which claims to debunk this method of counting to Shabbat. The teaching claims that David in 1 Samuel 21 ate the showbread on Shabbat. Seeing that David was at most 3 days away from the new moon celebration of 1 Samuel 20, that would put the Shabbat on a date other than those mentioned above, thus debunking the count from the new moon. So, for those of you that may not be familiar with how the true Shabbat works, the scriptural Shabbat, I am going to give a Shabbat primer. And Elohim said, "Let lights come to be in the expanse of the Shamayim, to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and appointed times and for days and years." Genesis 1:14. And I'm coming from the Hallelujah Scriptures. He made the moon for appointed times. The sun knows it's going down. Psalm 104:19. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the appointed times of Yahuwah, which you are to proclaim as Kodesh gatherings, my appointed times are these. 6 days work is done, but the 7th day is a Shabbat of rest, a Kodesh gathering. You do no work, it is a Shabbat to Yahuwah in all your dwellings. These are the appointed times of Yahuwah, Kodesh gatherings, which you are to proclaim at their appointed times. In the 1st month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Pesach to Yahuwah." So, brothers and sisters, what we see here in Leviticus chapter 23, this is the annual cycle of the Most High's appointed times. So, as we all know, we see the annual festivals. We see the Pesach, and then it mentions first fruits, festival of unleavened bread, festival of weeks, feast of weeks, Shavuot, some call it Pentecost. And we see the annual festivals listed in order. And the reason why they're listed in order is because that is the order of appearance. You're going to see Passover before you see unleavened bread. You're going to see unleavened bread before you see Feast of Weeks. You're going to see Feast of Weeks before you see the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, brothers and sisters, the Sabbath works the same way. The reason why we see the 6 working days and the 7th day Sabbath listed first is because that is the first thing you're going to see in the annual cycle of the Most High's appointed times. You're going to see Rosh Chodesh, which is the head month of the year. And so it'll be the new moon, it'll be the head month of the year, and then what is the next thing you're going to see? 6 working days, and then a 7th day Shabbat. And then you're going to see another 6 working days, and that 6th working day of the second week is going to be the Pesach, the Passover. And then you will see the 7th day Shabbat, which will be the first day of unleavened bread. And so Leviticus 23, this is not a list and it's not a calendar, it's a cycle. And it's a cycle that lists everything in the exact order of appearance that you're going to see them. And so we see that the lights, the luminaries, that part of the purpose that the Most High made them and set them in order was for his appointed times. And so the sun, the moon, the stars, those are for his appointed times. And more specifically, we see that the moon is made for his appointed times. So, if the sun, moon, and stars were set in order, were appointed for his appointed times, and more specifically the moon, then where does the conflict come in? Why is there a conflict? Let me show you why. Now I'm going to reread the last 2 passages. He made the moon for appointed times, except for the Shabbat. The sun knows it's going down. That's Psalm 104:19, adding to the word of Yahuwah. Okay, now, Leviticus 23, 1 through 5. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, The appointed times of Yahuwah, which you are to proclaim as Kodesh gatherings, my appointed times are these. Strike. These are the appointed times of Yahuwah, Kodesh gatherings, which you are to proclaim at their appointed times. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Pesach to Yahuwah. That's Leviticus chapter 23, 1 through 5, taking away from the word of Yahuwah. So we know Torah says we are not to add to and we are not to take away. But brothers and sisters, now, of course, me quoting it like that's not the way I quote it for myself, but this is exactly what has been done to the Shabbat. Yahusha spoke of the Pharisees of his day, and he said that they made the word of Yahuwah of none effect through their tradition. So the Pharisees, they would add to the word of Yahuwah through the tradition of the elders, the oral traditions, and they would take away from the word of Yahuwah because they would put these oral traditions in place of Scripture. that they would disregard the scripture in order to keep their tradition. Well, brothers and sisters, when Yahusha said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but he was primarily dealing with the Pharisees, that keep in mind, Yahusha said that heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. He wasn't just speaking to his Talmudim, his disciples at that time. He's speaking to us. He's speaking to people of all generations when he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Brothers and sisters, that is exactly who is responsible for the confusion of the Shabbat and for what you see right here, the adding to the word of Yahuwah and the taking away. Because Pharisaical Judaism, the Pharisaical Judaism of Yahusha's time, evolved into what we know of as the Talmudic Judaism of today. It's the same thing. It's built upon the same traditions. And they do the same thing as they did in Yahusha's day. They make the word of Yahuwah of none effect through their traditions. And this is one of the ways they do it, brothers and sisters. So that is who is responsible for that. Praise Yahuwah. This was actually our forefathers now back in the early centuries. And then as time went on, our forefathers, along with the Edomites that were amongst us, made converts, and that turned into the Judaism of today. So it actually started with our people that were apostate now. Praise Yahuwah. Our people that had rejected Yahusha. Praise Yahuwah. And therefore they were rejected of Yahuwah. And so they are the ones over the years, especially in the earlier centuries, that have come up with this corruption. I'll have more to say on this in future videos. But if we get back to the pure word of Yahuwah, then we have it right. Once again, he made the moon for appointed times, no qualification there, no adding or taking away. The sun knows it's going down. And then where he says, my appointed times are these, he says 6 days work is done, but the seventh day is a Shabbat of rest. That's the very first one we see, because that is the one we're going to see most often out of all of them. There's nothing taken away, nothing added, nothing taken away. This is the pure word of Yahuwah, and that's what he's restoring in this end time hour, brothers and sisters. Now, to understand the Shabbat correctly, you need to understand the renewal of the moon, or the new moon. Thus said the Adon Yahuwah, the gate of the inner courtyard facing east is shut the 6 working days, but on the Shabbat it is open, and on the day of the new moon it is open. Now that's from Yechezkel or Ezekiel chapter 46, verse 1. So the reason why this is significant, brothers and sisters, is because the scriptures separate the 6 working days from the Shabbat, and not just from the Shabbat, but also from the new moon. Okay, we see the different functions here. The gate is, it is shut on the 6 working days, but on the Shabbat it's open, and on the new moon it is open. Now, because of the strength of the Pharisaical Judaic tradition that I just showed you earlier here, in corrupting the Shabbat, you have those who say, yeah, but obviously if the new moon falls on one of the 6 working days, then the gate will be open. Well, brothers and sisters, we don't see any exception made for that here in this passage, for one. And for two, if that were to occur, if a new moon were to occur on one of the 6 working days, then it would no longer be 6 working days. It would be 5 working days, brothers and sisters. And I'm going to show you why. And the people of the land shall also bow themselves at the entrance to this gate before Yahuwah on the Shabbatot and on the new moons. And that's from Ezekiel 46 in verse 3. Now, this is futuristic now. This is futuristic. This is prophecy. Now, why are the people of the land there bowing themselves at the entrance of the gate on this day? Because it's not a normal working day. It's either the Shabbat or it's the new moon. And it shall be that from new moon to new moon, and from Shabbat to Shabbat, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares Yahuwah. This is Yeshayahu, or Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 23. Once again, why is all flesh coming to worship before Yahuwah? This is futuristic now. This is in the kingdom age, because this is it's not a normal work day. It's not one of the 6 working days. It's the new moon, or it's the Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. This is why all flesh shall come to worship before Yahuwah. Now, I showed you the future. Let me show you the past. Let me show you how our people did it in the scriptures in times past. Hear this, you who are swallowing up the needy, to do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon pass, so that we sell grain, and the Shabbat, so that we trade our wheat, to make the ephah small and the shekel large, and to falsify the scales by deceit. And that's Amos chapter 8, verse 5. So here we see these greedy merchants, and they're grieved because they can't go out and rip people off when on the Shabbat, which we all already know and agree with, but also on the new moon they couldn't. Why? Because the new moon and the Shabbat were not part of the 6 working days. So they could not go and sell their wares and rip people off on the Shabbat or on the new moon. These are non-working days. Now, the new moon, it doesn't carry the same restrictions as the Shabbat. On the Shabbat, we're not supposed to do any work. Whereas on the new moons, we see by example that our forefathers treated the new moon as a non-commercial day of worship. They come before Yahuwah to worship just like we see is going to be done in the kingdom age, and they did not do their normal commercial work on that day. And that's why these greedy merchants were so upset. Now, this is just a primer, and so obviously I can't cover everything from A to Z in regard to the scriptural Shabbat, and so I do want to let you know about some questions that will be answered in future videos. What about the 30th day of the month? I'm going to answer that question, because whenever you see the scriptural Shabbat, the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, and when you see people try to represent that on a Gregorian style calendar with all the boxes and the numbers and all of that, that everything seems to line up, but you seem to have this 30th day that's off to the side. And it does look a little funky, when you try to represent it with a Gregorian type of calendar. And that's because it's never meant to be represented that way. But what about that 30th day of the month? What do we do with that? Is that a non-day? Does that day count? Does it not count? I am going to address that in future videos because the scriptures have an answer for us on that. All right, how could the Shabbat be counted by the moon if the Shabbat was the 7th day and the moon was created on the 4th day? And so I have an answer for that as well. And I'll be dealing with that in future videos. All right, for the festival of Shavuot, or weeks, how do you get 7 lunar Sabbaths within 50 days? So if you are you're going across a couple of new moons here, then how do you do it within 50 days? Wouldn't that be 52 days, or wouldn't you have some extra days? How do you fit all that in? Well, brothers and sisters, I have an answer for that, and I have an answer from Scripture for that. What about the historians who say the Hebrews kept Shabbat on Saturn's day? So I will answer that in future videos, and I'll just give you a heads up on this one that this is, yes, historians did say that about the Hebrews in ancient times, keeping Shabbat on Saturn's day, but it's not what you think. I'll give you that clue right now. It's not what you think. If the perpetual 7-day count to Shabbat is wrong, then when did it change? So I will address that in future videos as well. As far as, we're going to take a look at history. We're going to take a look at different changes in the worship calendar that did take place and when they took place. So, brothers and sisters, as of right now I do have some information that will lead you in the right direction with this. I don't quite have the smoking gun yet. I'm looking for it now. I'm looking for it. But at the same time, the information that I do have, I believe will be very enlightening to you. And I believe it will point you in the right direction with this, because there was a change. There was a transition from counting it from the luminaries as it was done in the scriptures and in ancient times to counting it the way that it is done traditionally today. The rabbinical Jewish Sabbath of counting 6 days, resting the seventh, and beginning the 6-day count again, and doing that perpetually, on and on, with the idea that it's always been done like that all the way back to creation. So, brothers and sisters, there definitely has been a change, and we will address that in the future. So, Shabbat examples from the scriptures. So, brothers and sisters, if we're going to prove all things, that people can have their theories of how the Shabbat is to be counted. You have your traditional, rabbinical, Jewish, Talmudic, Jewish Shabbat. And, as we already mentioned, that's the way most people keep it. You have the perpetual 7-day count to Shabbat. You have the Shabbat counted by the luminaries that I'm talking about in this video. You have some people that reset the count to Shabbat once a year, and they keep more of a Enoch type calendar, Qumran calendar. You have people like that. You had people like that in YAHUSHA'S day. Praise Yahuwah. You had people like that. They were called the Essenes. They kept a completely solar calendar. And from my understanding, I believe they did a perpetual 7-day count to Shabbat. So that idea has been around, for quite a while. But brothers and sisters, this is where the rubber meets the road. Whatever theory you have as to which count to Shabbat is correct, do you have examples from the scriptures? Do you have receipts for your belief of how to count to the Shabbat? Well, brothers and sisters, I'm about to show you some. And the manna ceased at that time on the morrow of the Passover, and there was no more manna for the children of Israel, and they ate of the produce of the land of Canaan. So this is from Yashar 88:12. You can compare that to Joshua chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. Now we know from Exodus 16 that the Most High would rain down 6 days of manna. He would double up on the 6th day, and the manna would cease on the 7th day. There would be no manna. And then after the 7th day, on the first day of the next week, then the manna would start up again. Praise Yahuwah. So, here it says the manna ceased at that time on the morrow of Passover. So if you study that phrase, what that actually means is the morning after Passover. That's when the manna ceased at that time. And so the manna ceased, and if you look in Exodus 16, it says that Yah rained manna for 40 years. Well, this was at the end of the 40th year of him raining down the manna. Remember, it was the second month of the year when he started raining down the manna, and then he rained it down 40 years. And then here, this is the first month of the year, and it says it ceased on the morrow of Passover. And so it began the day after the 15th when they got there. Okay, when they got there from their journey, it began the morning after the 15th, which would have been the 16th, and then it ceased on the 15th, which would be the morrow of Passover, to be the day after Passover. That's when the manna ceased. Well, remember how he did the manna now. 6 days of manna, double up on the 6th day, it would cease on the 7th day. And so here, the second cycle of the year, brothers and sisters, where Passover's the last day that they received the manna. That would have been the 6th day of that weekly manna cycle. And so the 7th day would be the day that the manna would cease, and it did not come back anymore. That's the difference between the manna ceasing throughout the 40 years, praise Yahuwah, and then the manna ceasing here in this verse was it would cease on the Shabbat, which is the morrow of Passover, day after Passover, and then it did not start back up again. It says there was no more manna. It did not start back up again on the first day of that next week, but they ate of the produce of the land of Canaan. So seeing that it ceased on Shabbat, morrow of Passover, 15th, then that means that all the Shabbats for that month fell on the correct lunar dates, the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th. Well, let me show you something else. And it was in the second month, on the first day of the month, that Yahuwah said to Yahusha, "Rise up, behold, I have given Jericho into thy hand, with all the people thereof, and all your fighting men shall go round the city once each day. Thus shall ye do for 6 days." That's in Yashar 88, verse 14. You can compare that to Joshua chapter 6, verse 3. And so this is right after the month that the manna ceased. The very next month, on the first day of the month, that's when the Jericho march began. You got to understand that it said all your fighting men, that the men, they were armed and ready for war and went around the city once each day and did that for 6 days. It says, "And let the 7 Kohanim bear 7 ram's horns before the ark, and on the 7th day go around the city 7 times while the Kohanim blow the horns." That's Joshua chapter 6, verse 4. So, brothers and sisters, this is an offensive battle maneuver. Whether they went around the city once, which they did the first 6 days, or whether they went around the city 7 times, like they did the 7th day, before actually going in and taking the city, for those who keep a perpetual count to Shabbat, 6 days, work 6 days, rest the 7th, work 6 days, rest the 7th, on into infinity, there is a serious conflict here. And the question is, which one of these days was Shabbat to you? Praise Yahuwah. Now, the stock answer to this is, well, Yah commanded them to do that. So because Yah commanded them to do that, then it doesn't matter. You know, the one of these days could have been Shabbat, but it's because Yah commanded them to do it, then it was okay for them to do. Well, brothers and sisters, the reason why that does not work is because in Exodus 16, when Yahuwah proved them whether they would keep his commandments or not, that he rained the extra manna down on the 6th day, he rained no manna down on the 7th day. He told Mashah to tell the people, do not go out to gather manna on the 7th day. They did it anyway. And so Yahuwah rebuked them, and they were told, every man do not go out of your place on the Shabbat. He had already told them that in Exodus chapter 16. Now, Here, this is an offensive battle maneuver. They were not defending themselves. All right, this is an offensive battle maneuver. It's not just a matter of they just did what Yah told them to do, so it would have been okay for them to do. The question is, would Yah have told them to do something like this? Would Yah have sent his people into an offensive battle like this on the Shabbat? And brothers and sisters, if you say he would do that, then can you support that with a second witness? Can you show anywhere else in the scriptures where that the children of Israel did something like this on a Shabbat, simply because Yah told them to? There's a big difference between Yah telling the priest to offer up offerings on the Shabbat, because Yahusha said that the priests in the temple, that they profane the Shabbat and they're blameless because they're doing what Yah commanded them to do. There's a huge difference between offering up burnt offerings and grain offerings and going in an offensive battle maneuver. Big difference. And here's another thing to consider as well. You remember the Maccabees. You remember how the Maccabees allowed themselves to be killed on the Shabbat when the enemy came in, because they would not fight on Shabbat. And then they gathered themselves together and they said, hey, we got to do something about this. And they decided that if we are attacked, then we can defend ourselves on the Sabbath. And so they started defending themselves on Shabbat if they were attacked. Now think about it. If the Maccabees, because you remember now, they were from what I understand, the priestly family are tied into that. So they knew the scriptures backwards, forwards, inside out. So they knew about the Jericho March now. Do you think that the Maccabees would have allowed themselves to get killed if they had a clear precedent from the Jericho March that one of these days was the Sabbath, and that they were sent into an offensive battle maneuver on the Sabbath? Do you not think that they could draw from that example and say, hey, we can fight on Shabbat? Look at the Jericho March. But brothers and sisters, the reason why they weren't able to draw from the Jericho March to draw an example of fighting on the Shabbat is because that's not what happened here, brothers and sisters. Praise Yahuwah. What happened here is that the first day of the Jericho March was on the first day of the month. It was on the renewal of the moon, or the new moon. And then the last day of the Jericho March was on the seventh day of the month. And the seventh day Sabbath fell on the 8th day of the month. That month, brothers and sisters. Praise Yahuwah. And so seeing that Yah would not do something like this, he would not send his people into an offensive battle maneuver on the Shabbat when he just told them to not leave their place, not go out of their place on Shabbat. He just told them that. Praise Yahuwah. Years prior to that. So he would not do something like that. And so the Shabbat had to have been on the 8th day of the month. And you know what? That would give us 2 months in a row of the correct lunar dates for the Shabbat, the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of the month. Praise Yahuwah. So, brothers and sisters, if that's not enough for you, then let me give you something even better than that. Shabbat examples from the Brit Chadashah, or New Testament writings. And on the last great day of the festival, Yahusha stood and cried out, saying, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me, and let him who believes in me drink. This is in John chapter 7, verse 37. So it says the last great of the festival. I have 8 in day in parentheses here, because I don't believe that the word day is actually in the text. But the last great day of the festival. And so the question that people ask is, well, what day was that? Was that day 7 or was that day 8? Well, brothers and sisters, in every single case, if you read about Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles in the Hebrew Scriptures, it's always listed as a 7-day feast. They always talk about the 7 days of the feast. 7 days. It's never called an 8-day feast. Always a 7-day feast. And whenever the 8th day is mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures, it's always mentioned as a solemn assembly. It's something that closes out the festival, but it's a separate deal altogether. It's a solemn assembly, but it is never called the 8th day of the feast. It's only a 7-day feast, brothers and sisters. And to drive this point home, I have highlighted here Hoshana Rabbah. Now, Hoshana Rabbah is a Hebrew tradition. And what you have to understand about Yochanan, or John, was that he wrote this good news account for people who were not already familiar with Hebrew customs. You notice he used different language like Passover, a feast of the Yahudim. And so you could tell he's not talking to Hebrews, because Hebrews would already know that that's a feast of the Yahudim. So he would call the Passover a feast of the Yahudim. And Yochanan would talk not just of the biblical feasts, but he would talk about the traditional days that they kept as well. So I believe it's in Yochanan chapter 10 where it said that Yahusha was speaking on the porch of Shlomo, the porch of Solomon, at the Feast of Dedication. The Feast of Dedication is not a scriptural feast, brothers and sisters. It is a tradition. So it is a tradition that came later, and we see that Yochanan wrote of it. And so for him to make reference to something that is traditional, that's not something that was out of character for Yochanan, for those that have an issue with tradition versus scripture. Yochanan covered both. So Hoshana Rabbah, what is it? What is it? Hoshana Rabbah means the great salvation. And so what Hoshana Rabbah was, it was a Hebrew tradition wherein our people cried out to the Most High for salvation and also for rain for their crops. Now, Hoshana Rabbah, that this tradition was performed on the 7th day, the final day of the feast. Said each day of Sukkot, they conducted a libation ritual where the Kohen would fill up a vessel of water from the pool of Shiloah, followed by the worshipers who would do the same. So the pool of Shiloah, other places it's called the pool of Siloam. And so for the first 6 days, they engaged in a procession where they brought the water back through the water gate to the temple, circled the altar once, then poured water on it. On the 7th day, they circled it 7 times and poured water on it in remembrance of the Jericho March. Now, I have Watergate highlighted here because Watergate is actually in the scriptures. Now, it doesn't mention it in the scriptures in connection with this tradition, but it does mention it in and of itself, the Watergate. If you look that up in your Bible app, you will see this Watergate, and this was constructed after coming back from the Babylonian captivity. So this is a second temple thing. This wasn't something, we read about back in Shlomo's day, but this was after the captivity, after the second temple was built. We do read about the Watergate, and that's what they would come through in this tradition to do this water ritual. And I mention that because remember what Yahusha said when he stood up now. Because remember, they're crying out for salvation and crying out for rain on this last day, Hoshana Rabbah, day 7 of the festival. Yahusha stands up and says, if any man come to me, let him drink. He that believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. And so here he's saying something very fitting for the traditional occasion here. Praise Yahuwah, because he's letting these people know that the salvation that you're seeking is right here before you. Praise Yahuwah. And whereas they were doing a ritual with natural water, here he was telling them about being able to come to him to get the water of life. Praise Yahuwah. So you see the connection even between what he said and then what was going on that day, brothers and sisters. Now, the seventh day was called Hoshana Rabbah and was considered the grand finale and the greatest day of Sukkot. It was filled with praise and great rejoicing as they chanted Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 12, verse 3 in some of the Psalms. And so Isaiah 12:3 says, with joy shall you draw water out of the wells of salvation. And so they would chant that over and over again. Now, the eighth day was called Shemini Eretz and was called a solemn assembly. So that eighth day, even traditionally, it was never called the greatest day of the festival. It was only called a solemn assembly. Just like in the scriptures, it's only called a solemn assembly. Whereas the seventh day, that was the grand finale. This is why Yochanan said that on the last day, the greatest day of the feast, the last great day of the feast. That's why he said that, because it was Hoshana Rabbah. Now, I say that, brothers and sisters, because that there are some who try to say, well, that last great day was the eighth day, and that's for two reasons. There is a denomination, and it's the Worldwide Church of God by Herbert W. Armstrong, and they were active back in the 70s and 80s, I believe it was, but they were Sabbath and feast keepers. These are Gentiles, but they were Sabbath and feast keepers. It was a Christian denomination. They kept Sabbath, they kept feast days, and they disregarded Hebrew tradition and decided to call the eighth day of Tabernacles the last great day. I know this because I fellowshipped with a brother that used to be connected with the Worldwide Church of God, and I kept feast with him, and he would call the eighth day the last great day because that was their denominational context. That was their denominational concept. And so they did not give attention to Hebrew tradition. And so that's what they called it. And so whenever somebody is trying to make a case of the eighth day being the day that Yahusha stood up and said what he said, it's usually somebody influenced by the Worldwide Church of God or one of their spinoffs, because they have a lot of spinoffs because they broke up. Or it's somebody trying to debunk the Shabbat by the luminaries. All right. And the reason why they would try to use this idea to debunk the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, I'll show you why here in a minute. Okay, so Hoshana Rabbah, I just told you what that is. Now, it says, and at dawn he came again into the Mikdash, and all the people were coming to him. And having sat down, he was teaching them. Okay, this is in the next chapter. This is John chapter 8, verse 2. So there is continuity between John 7 and John 8. There's no break here. Praise Yah. And it says, at dawn he came into the Mikdash. He was teaching them. Now, if you read all the way through chapter 8, he's having this long conversation with the people, with the Yahudim. And, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they were present. But then the next chapter, chapter 9, you will also see that there is no break in time. This is the same day. All right, chapter 9, it's the same day. And this is where he healed the blind man. And then this caused a controversy. It says, they brought to the Pharisees the one who was once blind. Now, it was a Shabbat when Yahusha made the clay and opened his eyes. And so we see that the day after the last great day of the festival was the Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. The reason why that's such a big deal is that the last day of the Feast of Sukkot is the 21st day of the month. And so the Shabbat, that would put the Shabbat at the 22nd day of the month, which is one of the correct lunar dates. Praise Yahuwah. And so, as I said before, people who push for the 8th day, they're usually people who are connected with the Worldwide Church of God denomination or one of their spinoffs, or somebody who's aware of what I'm telling you here in this video, and they're trying to debunk the Shabbat counted by the luminaries. And so they do the same thing as Worldwide Church of God, and they disregard history, they disregard tradition, they disregard even what Yochanan was trying to convey to his audience. In other words, they take this out of context in order to forward their agenda, is what they're doing. And so they take it out of historical context, cultural context, linguistic context in order to prove a point. Well, brothers and sisters, we can't do that. Praise Yahuwah. And so if we let the context dictate the meaning, clearly that Yahusha stood up on the 7th day of the festival, praise Yahuwah, and the next day was the 22nd of the month, 8th day solemn assembly. Praise Yahuwah. And so we see that if the Shabbat was on the 22nd of the month, then surely it was on the 15th of the month and began the Feast of Tabernacles, which Yahusha attended. Now, let's look at another Shabbat, praise Yahuwah, when dealing with Yahusha and the Talmudim. Therefore, since it was the preparation, that the body should not remain on the stake on the Shabbat, for that Shabbat was a high one. The Yahudim asked Pilatus to have their legs broken and taken away. This is from Yochanan, John chapter 19, verse 31. So this is 6, perhaps 7 months later, because we don't know if there was a 13th month or not. Praise Yahuwah. But this was less than a year later, and when Yahusha was executed. So this is, all the scriptures that we're dealing with here, this is the last 6 or 7 months of Yahusha's life. And when he died, when he was executed, it was the preparation. Whenever it mentions preparation in the Brit Chadashah, New Covenant writings, it is always making reference to the day before the Shabbat, the day before the 7th day Shabbat, brothers and sisters. Praise Yahuwah. That the bodies should not remain on the stake on the Shabbat, for that Shabbat was a high one. Now, the highlight here, I said, note, the word high means great. There is no high Shabbat connected to the festival of Matzot, or unleavened bread. If you go through the Hebrew scriptures, it's nowhere to be found. The only feasts, the only appointed times that are called Shabbat are the feasts of the 7th month. They're called Shabbathon. They're special Sabbaths. Praise Yahuwah. But it's only the feasts of the 7th month, not the feast of the 1st month. Never do you see the first and last day of unleavened bread called Sabbaths or called Shabbathot. Praise Yahuwah. So the idea of a high Sabbath, praise Yahuwah, meaning just a whether it's the first or last day of unleavened bread, disregarding the 7th day Sabbath, that is purely a tradition of men, brothers and sisters. That's nowhere to be found in the scriptures. What Yochanan was conveying here was that it said for that Shabbat, that 7th day Sabbath was a high one. It was a great one. Well, the reason why it was a great one was because it was also the first day of unleavened bread, which is Independence Day for the Hebrews. Praise Yahuwah. It was the day that we were told to commemorate throughout all generations when the Most High delivered our people out of Mitzrayim with a strong hand and with a mighty outstretched arm. That's what made that Shabbat a great one. Not that it was a high Sabbath, because it was either the first or last day of unleavened bread, because there's no such thing. brothers and sisters. You can search for it. You don't have to take my word for it. Search for it. Praise Yahuwah. If you find a high Sabbath connected to first and last day of unleavened bread, you let me know about that. Praise Yahuwah. But I haven't found one, and everybody who I have challenged to find it has not found it, brothers and sisters. So high Sabbath, that's not what John was conveying here. He was conveying that the seventh day Sabbath, that was a great one. Praise Yahuwah. That was a great one because it was Independence Day for the Hebrews. Praise Yahuwah. So why is it important to nail down these days wherein the seventh day Sabbath synchronized with the first day of these two festivals? So you may be asking that. I mean, what's the big deal? Why does it even matter? Well, brothers and sisters, it's a huge deal. And I'm going to show you why it is such a huge deal. Praise Yahuwah. And not only is it a huge deal, brothers and sisters, this is a deal breaker. Praise Yah. When I get through showing you what I'm going to show you right here, this is something that can cause us to shut the book and go home. This is a deal breaker right here. We need to look no further to know how to count to Shabbat because these 2 days were recognized as Shabbat by Yahusha. We do not need to go back to David or Moses. And so, as most of us already know and agree with, that Yahusha never had an issue with the day that Shabbat was kept by the Pharisees and the scribes and the majority of the Yahudim of his day. We see him and the disciples, they kept those days as Shabbat. They had no issue with the Shabbats that were being kept by the majority of the people of that day and by the religious leaders. Praise Yahuwah. So because these 2 days were recognized as Shabbat by Yahusha, we don't need to go back to David. We don't need to go back to Moses. We don't need to go back and see this is where, I see people, they're wanting to dig into the book of Enoch, Jubilees, and they want to look into the ancient this and the ancient that, and they want to look into all this stuff. When, brothers and sisters, we don't need to go any further back than this right here. Because we know if anybody had it right, it was Yahusha. Praise Yahuwah. Now, let me make this clear. Praise Yahuwah. It is impossible. Let me say it again. It is impossible to go from the first day of Sukkot or Tabernacles to the first day of Matzot, unleavened bread, with a recurring 7-day count, whether the year is 12 months or 13. Praise Yahuwah. Try it yourself. Try it yourself. I challenge you to try it yourself with every scenario that you could think of. Start with the first day of Sukkot, the 15th of the 7th month, okay? And then count to the first day of Matzot, first day of unleavened bread, 15th of the first month. And whether you try it with a 12-month year or a 13th month year, brothers and sisters, and knowing that our months alternate between 29:30, 29:30, and every now and then there's like a double up, and we've seen that before. Those of us that track the days of the month for the feast days, that every now and then you'll get like a double 30. Like that. So you can even try it with that. Try it with 29, 30, 29, 30, 30, 29. Try that combination like that. I mean, whatever combination you try of going from the 15th of the 7th month to the 15th of the first month, that in every single case, brothers and sisters, you cannot connect these 2 dates with a recurring 7-day count. The only way there could have been a 7th-day Sabbath on the first and the first day of Sukkot and then the 8th day solemn assembly, where when Yahusha had healed the blind man like that, and the Shabbat that followed his death, the Shabbat that was one day after his death. The only way for those 2 days to be the seventh day Sabbath is if the Sabbath was counted by the moon, by the new moon in Yahusha's day. That's the only way both of those days can be Shabbat. Praise Yahweh. You cannot connect those 2 dates with a recurring 7-day count. I'm going to say it again. You cannot connect these 2 dates with a recurring 7-day count. Try it yourself. Praise Yahweh. Get you a pen and paper. Try it yourself. Try every scenario. Try 12-month, 13-month, whatever. Try it yourself. Try to connect these dates with a recurring 7-day count with the way that the moon cycles are today now. Praise Yahuwah. With the alternating moon cycles, even with the double up, go with the double 30 like that, like we see sometimes. Even with that, you will not be able to connect these 2 dates with a recurring 7-day count. And as I said, brothers and sisters, that's a deal breaker right there. That's a deal breaker, because we're talking Yahusha. We're talking the Shabbat that Yahusha and the Talmudim kept. Praise Yahuwah. Also, we have a strong, reliable first century eyewitness to the 7th-day Shabbat synchronizing with the first day of both major festivals. In other words, the 7th-day Shabbat landing on the 15th of every month, causing it to synchronize with the first day of unleavened bread and the first day of tabernacles. Praise Yahuwah. And so a strong, reliable first century eyewitness, and I'm going to deal with that, and I'm going to tell you who this witness is, and I'm going to tell you what he said. In future videos, I'm going to bring this out. Praise Yahuwah. And the reason why I say a first century eyewitness, this is somebody who was there. Praise Yah, because you have writings like the Mishnahs, for example. Some people try to use the writings of the Mishnahs, which is the first part of the Talmud, and to try to discount the Shabbat counted by the luminaries. But brothers and sisters, Mishnahs or he said, she said, is what it is. And if somebody's offended by that, I stand by that. Mishnahs are not eyewitness accounts. It's tradition. It's the traditions passed down from generation to generation. Praise Yahuwah. And because these are the people who rejected Yahusha. Praise Yah. And Yahusha called them a generation of vipers. Praise Yah. I don't put anything past them. And so the first century eyewitness that I'm going to be bringing forth to confirm the synchronized Sabbath, the Sabbath that synchronizes with the major festivals, that this is someone who is actually there. This is someone who lived through that period. This is someone who lived in the time of Yahusha and the Talmudim and wrote at that time as well. This is not he said, she said. Praise Yahuwah. Hallelujah. So brothers and sisters, like I said, this is a deal breaker. This is all you need to know right here. This is really the only example you need. Praise Yah, but there are more examples, and I will show them to you in future videos. Now, balancing the Shabbat commandments. You may ask yourself, why are some people so adamant about this recurring 7-day count, this traditional, rabbinical, Jewish Sabbath that, the one that most people keep as Shabbat? Why are some people so adamant about this? Why do they fight the Shabbat counted by the luminaries? Why do they fight it so hard? And just why are they so intense? Why are they, just why do they believe what they believe? Well, I'm going to show you one of the reasons. And part of it is an imbalance when it comes to the Shabbat commandments, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Now, remember the Shabbat day to kadosh it. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work, but the 7th day is the Shabbat of Yahuwah your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahuwah made the Shamayim and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore Yahuwah barak the Shabbat day and kadosh it. That's from Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. So, brothers and sisters, many of those that are stuck on this recurring 7-day count, they act as if this is the only memorial given in the Shabbat commandments. Praise Yahuwah, that this is the only thing that we're told to memorialize in the Shabbat commandments is the creation week. And so this doctrine is built upon creation week. But this is what's missing. Guard the Shabbat to kadosh it, as Yahuwah your Elohim commanded you. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work. But the seventh day is a Shabbat to Yahuwah your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, so that your male servant and your female servant rest as you do. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Mitzrayim, and Yahuwah your Elohim brought you out from there by a strong hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yahuwah your Elohim commanded you to perform the Shabbat day. That's from Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 12 through 15. So we see where it says, and you shall remember. 2 things that you shall remember. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Mitzrayim, and also remember that Yahuwah your Elohim brought you out from there. Brothers and sisters, the 7th day Shabbat is a memorial not just of creation week, but also of the Exodus. Why would the 7th day Shabbat be a memorial of the Exodus? Because the Exodus took place on Aviv 15, the 15th of the first month, our Independence Day, the day that made the Shabbat that came right after YAHUSHA'S death such a high Shabbat, a great Shabbat. That Shabbat was a high one, a great one. Why? Because this is what it memorialized. This was the very day that Yahuwah brought our forefathers out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. It is a memorial. The 7th day Shabbat is a memorial of the Exodus, Aviv 15. So when we balance the memorials, brothers and sisters, when we balance the fact that the Shabbat memorializes creation week, but also the Exodus, then we're not locked in to this idea that it has to be a recurring 7-day count. Praise Yahuwah. And if you notice, that people that are strong adherents to that way of keeping Shabbat, you don't hear them quote Devarim 5 very often. You'll hear them quote Exodus 20 often, but you won't hear them quote Devarim 5, Deuteronomy 5 very often. And brothers and sisters, it's important that we quote both to show the balance. Praise Yahuwah. Now, finally, is perpetuity built into the Shabbat commandments? And so, brothers and sisters, I've talked with people, and I myself used to believe the Shabbat that way. So I'm not throwing shade or putting anybody down, brothers and sisters. But at the same time, I've spoken with people that are very strong on the perpetual 7-day count. And there are some who actually believe that perpetuity is actually built in to the Shabbat commands, that when it says 6 days you labor, do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath, you do no work, that they believe that perpetuity is right there in the commandment. It shows you that it's perpetual. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm going to show you here that is not the case. Look at this. And for 6 years you are to sow your land and shall gather its increase, but the 7th year you are to let it rest, and shall leave it, and the poor of your people shall eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field eat. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive yard. Next verse. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the seventh day you rest, in order that your ox and your donkey might rest, and the son of your female servant and the sojourner be refreshed. Brothers and sisters, if you read these commandments, the land rest commandment and then the Shabbat rest commandment, in Exodus chapter 23, it's one right after the other. Look at what I have highlighted in both of these commandments. They are structured exactly the same. There's no difference in how these commandments are structured. 6 years, sow your land. 7th year, let it rest. 6 days, do your work. 7th day, you rest. Structured exactly the same. Praise Yahuwah. Now, the reason why I say that, brothers and sisters, is that we know that the land rest is interrupted after 7 cycles of 7 years in the 50th year with the year of Jubilee. Praise Yahuwah. And so, seeing that it is reset after every 49 years, then that breaks the cycle. That proves that just by Yah saying 6 years you sow your land, gather its increase the 7th year, that perpetuity is not automatic in the land rest, because we know that it's interrupted by the year of Jubilee. Praise Yahuwah. And so one may say, well, it's interrupted because Yah said it's interrupted. And brothers and sisters, it's not a matter of Yah deciding to interrupt it. That if we look in the land rest command here, we see there's nothing at all in the land rest command that would prevent it from being interrupted. Praise Yahuwah. And so, brothers and sisters, the land rest cycle is reset because it's resettable. Praise Yahuwah, because it's able to be reset. There's nothing preventing it to be reset within the commandment. Well, brothers and sisters, if that applies to the land rest, then that applies to the Shabbat rest. Praise Yahuwah. That if there's nothing within the land rest commandment that would disallow it to be reset after X amount of cycles, then the same must be said about the 7th day Shabbat. There's nothing within the Shabbat command that would disallow it to be reset after X amount of cycles. Praise Yahuwah. So, summary of the Shabbat primer. The Most High ordained the luminaries to govern his appointed times on the 4th day of creation, and more specifically, the moon. The 7th day Shabbat is the first of his appointed times that will occur within the yearly cycle as laid out in Leviticus chapter 23. The manna ceased on the Shabbat, which was the day after the Pesach and the 15th of Abib. The Jericho march started on the new moon and ended on the 7th day of the month. The Shabbat being the next day landed on the 8th, giving us 2 months in a row of Shabbatot, or Sabbaths, counted from the new moon. Yahusha attended the 7th day of Sukkot on the 21st of the 7th month. The next day was Shabbat, which was the 22nd. So we know that the 15th was the Shabbat as well. Yahusha also was impaled on Pesach in one day before Shabbat, which fell on the 15th of the first month. Once again, brothers and sisters, it is impossible to count from the 15th of the 7th month to the 15th of the first month with a recurring 7-day count. And like I said before, this is the deal breaker right here, because these are the Shabbats that Yahusha acknowledged. Praise Yahuwah. Praise Yah. And so this is the bottom line. Like I said, we don't need to go way, way back in history like that. What did Yahusha acknowledge as Shabbat? Well, he acknowledged these as Shabbat, and you cannot connect them with a recurring 7-day count. Also, the Shabbat is a memorial, not just of Creation Week, but also of the Exodus, which occurred on Aviv 15. The land rest commandment and the Shabbat commandment are structured exactly the same. Therefore, perpetuity is not built in to either of them. Both are subject to reset. Praise Yahuwah. So back to our lesson here. 5 reasons why David did not eat the showbread on the Shabbat. We're going to look at the passage in question in 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. And David came to Nob and Ahimelech the Kohen, and Ahimelech trembled when he met David, and asked him, Why are you alone, and no one is with you? And David said to Ahimelech the Kohen, The sovereign has commanded me a word, and said to me, Let no one know whatever of the word about which I send you, and which I have commanded you. And I have directed my young men to such and such a place. And now, what do you have on hand? Give 5 loaves into my hand, or whatever is found. And the Kohen answered David and said, There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is Kodesh bread, or set-apart bread, provided the young men have kept themselves from women. And David answered the Kohen and said to him, Truly women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are Kodesh, and it is an ordinary mission, and also it was Kodesh in the vessel today. Then the Kohen gave him Kodesh bread, for there was no bread there except the showbread, which had been taken from before Yahuwah in order to put hot bread in on the day it was taken away. So, reason number 1 as to why David did not eat this showbread on Shabbat. The lie, because David lied now, the lie that David told the Kohen Haggadah would not have been believable if that day was Shabbat. David lied to the Kohen Haggadah, high priest, saying, The sovereign has commanded me a word. 1 Samuel 21, verse 2. Also, the Kohen knew that he traveled there and was passing through to travel elsewhere. Now, let's look at this passage again. This is the original passage in question. Praise Yahuwah. And look at what Daud says here at the end here, where it says, And the vessels of the young men are Kodesh. And it said, And it is an ordinary mission. This is how it's translated out in the Hallelujah Scriptures. And it is an ordinary mission. And also, it was Kodesh in the vessel today. Praise Yahuwah. And so here he said it's an ordinary mission. He didn't say it was some type of emergency situation that would have been justifiable for him to do all of that stuff on Shabbat. He said it's an ordinary mission. So, once again, that he's saying the sovereign had commanded him a word, given him a command to do something. And here the Kohen knows that he traveled there and he's passing through to travel elsewhere. Now, if this day were the Shabbat, this is the high priest now. You don't think the high priest would have something to say about that? Praise Yahuwah. When Rahab hid the spies and lied to the pursuers, she told a believable lie. This is what she said. The men came to me, but I did not know from where they were from. Then it came to be, as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly so that you overtake them. You can find that in Yahusha chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. And so what did they do? They pursued him quickly and tried to overtake him. Why? Because Rahab told a believable lie. Praise Yahuwah. Now think about Daud. Here he's talking to the Kohen Haggadah. He's talking to the high priest. And he's telling a lie to him. And David being a wise man, he knew if he was going to lie to him, that it would have to be a believable lie. That wasn't a believable lie for Shabbat, brothers and sisters. Now, reason number 2. And this ties into why this doctrine is being taught in the first place, that David ate the showbread on Shabbat, and so that would debunk the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, because it's too close to the new moon as far as in proximity of days. And so that's with the assumption that because Daud ate showbread on that day, and that because the showbread is changed out on the Shabbat, then that day just had to be Shabbat. And so the assumption is that the Kohanim, the priests, that they just eat up all the showbread on Shabbat, that the only day that would have been available to give Daud showbread would have been Shabbat. Well, here in reason number 2, I'm showing you that that is definitely not the case. The showbread was available during the week, not just Shabbat. It would have been available for about 4 days in order to supply Daud with 5 loaves. And as we go further into this, brothers and sisters, that you'll really see that it would have been available for at least 4 days, because with Daud, now keep in mind now, Daud did not expect to get showbread, because showbread is supposed to be for the Kohanim, the priests alone. Daud did not come there expecting to get showbread. So when he said 5 loaves, he was just talking about 5 ordinary loaves. Praise Yahuwah. And so I'm going to show you a little later in this lesson here why him asking for 5 ordinary loaves even makes reason 2 even stronger. Now there are 85 Kohanim. You can see that in 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 18, 85 Kohanim in the city, which wore the linen ephod. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that each weekly rotation for the tabernacle would have been about 3 or 4 men, because you'd have to have some type of rotation where everybody would get their chance throughout the year. Now, the way that Daud did that was he had the 24 courses, and they would all serve twice in the year like that. And so with this, that I believe it's fair to say that they had some type of rotation where everybody would get their turn throughout the year. And also, it said that each weekly rotation for the tabernacle would have been about 3 or 4 men, as in the days of Aharon and his sons. We know that it takes from 3 to 5 men in order to do the daily duties of the tabernacle, because they were originally done by Aharon and his sons, Aharon and his 4 sons. That would have been 5 men. But remember, 2 of his sons died, so that brought it down to 3 men. So whether it was with 5 men or 3 men, they were able to take care of the daily ministration of everything that went on in the tabernacle. So that's why I say 3 or 4 men. Only the officiating Kohanim, the priests, only the officiating priests ate of the 12 loaves of showbread that were removed from the table on Shabbat, and they only did so in the Kodesh place. You can see that in Leviticus 24, verse 9. So it was not for their families or for the Levites. It was only for the officiating Kohanim. Praise Yahuwah. Now check this out. About 5 or 6 pounds, or 2 omers, of flour were put into each loaf of showbread. There's Leviticus chapter 24, verse 5. The officiating Kohanim ate up to 7 loaves, which would total about 40 pounds of this bread before David arrived, which would have taken them about 4 days. So in other words, all the showbread could not have been eaten on Shabbat. Now, the newer information I have concerning David, like I said, it makes this case even stronger. And so it would have taken them It said about 4 days. Well, with the new information I'm going to share with you, we're talking maybe even 5 days, 5 or 6 days. Praise Yahuwah. But, the point being that these loaves of showbread were, so dense, so big and so dense that all of the showbread could not have been eaten on Shabbat. And so I'm going to give you a visual picture so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, we're actually going to read from Leviticus 24, 5 through 9. It said, "And you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with 2/10 parts in each cake." And so 1/10 part of an ephah is an omer. So this is 2 omers. 2/10 parts in each cake. "And you shall put them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the clean table before Yahuwah. And you shall put clear frankincense on each row, and it shall be on the bread as a remembrance portion, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. On every Shabbat he is to arrange it before Yahuwah continually from the children of Israel, an everlasting covenant, and it shall be for Aharon and his sons, and they shall eat it in the Kodesh place, because it is most Kodesh to him, from the offerings of Yahuwah made by fire, an everlasting law." So there you have it. Praise Yahuwah. 2 omers went into each cake of showbread. 5 or 6 pounds, brothers and sisters. Just to give you something that you can relate to, the average loaf of bread in the store weighs about 1 pound. Okay? Now, if it's like a artisan bread or a rustic bread like that, maybe 2 pounds. Brothers and sisters, these cakes of showbread were 5 or 6 pounds apiece. Praise Yahuwah. And as far as them being changed out on Shabbat, if you notice in that passage that we read, 1 Samuel 21, you can go back and reread it, where it says that showbread was taken away from the table of Yahuwah to put hot bread in on the day it was taken away. It didn't specify what day it was taken away. It just said on the day it was taken away. It didn't say that day was the day. It didn't even say what day it was taken away. It just said on the day it was taken away. So it was taken away from the table of Yahuwah at some point in time, because that's just how they did it. They would put it out hot. They would let it be there all throughout the week for 7 days, and then they would take that off for the Kohanim to eat and put the fresh one on to stay there throughout the week. Praise Yahuwah. This is the word which Yahuwah has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, an omer for each being, according to the number of beings. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. Exodus 16, verse 16. This is making reference to the manna that fell. And so if you remember, they would take the manna, they would crush it up like flour, and they would bake it, and they would make, bread with it or whatever. But here, because the question is, how much bread can a man eat in a day? And here it says 1 omer. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, an omer for each being, according to the number of beings. So in other words, you got 6, 7 people in your tent, then you get 6 or 7 omers, an omer for each being. So that's how much typically a man can eat in one day. All right, so here we're back here. All right, and now I want to just put emphasis again on this last point. About 5 or 6 pounds or 2 omers of flour were put into each loaf of showbread. Praise Yahuwah. And so that shows you that they did not eat up all the showbread on Shabbat. That we see that Yah in his infinite wisdom would provide for the Kohanim to eat throughout the week off of that showbread. Praise Yahuwah. So now for the visual aids. This is what some people think the showbread looked like. And so brothers and sisters, if the showbread looked like this, I could see why people would think that if David were able to get 5 loaves of showbread, it had to be Shabbat. Otherwise, the priest would have eaten all that up. Praise Yahuwah. And even myself, I mean, for a long time, I believed that the showbread, now maybe it didn't look like that, but because it said 2 rows of 6, I thought it would be like French bread that we would get from the store, and maybe two rows of 6 loaves of French bread. And so, but as far as the amount of bread that went into each piece, that my thought was similar to this right here. This is what a lot of people think that the showbread looks like. Praise Yahuwah. Now, this here is a much better representation of the showbread. All right, I got this from a group that has done a deep dive study into the biblical showbread. They've done a deep dive into the scriptures, into history, into tradition, because they wanted to replicate the showbread and the showbread table as accurately as they could. And so what they did was, they did everything to the T, the 5 or 6 pounds of flour going into the each loaf of the showbread, the 2 stacks of showbread, because it says 2 rows in the Bible, but Josephus tells us that it was actually 2 stacks of 6 with the showbread. Praise Yahuwah. So with people really studying this out and really striving to make an exact replica of what they had in the temple and tabernacle, this is what they came up with for 1 piece of showbread, 1 loaf of showbread. Look at how big that is. Look at how dense that is. Now, this would be what the showbread table would look like. So look at the 2 stacks of 6. And so you see how big and how dense those loaves are. Remember, 2 omers go into 1 loaf. And 1 omer is about how much 1 man can eat in 1 day. Praise Yahuwah. So basically, in 1 day, 1 of those pieces could feed 2 priests in 1 day. And keep in mind, I mean, if that's all they were eating, because with the manna, I mean, from what I understand, that's all they were eating. All right, but what we're going to see later on here is that the priests had more than just showbread to eat. And that brings us into our 3rd reason. And so reason number 3 as to why David did not eat the showbread on the Shabbat was, if you notice, the Kohen, the priest, said there was no bread there except for the showbread. So why is that a big deal? Okay, let's look at it again here. Verse 6, let's go to the bottom. It says, then the Kohen gave him Kodesh bread, for there was no bread there except the showbread, which had been taken before Yahuwah in order to put hot bread in on the day it was taken away. So remember when I said that? Remember when I said on the day it was taken away? It doesn't tell you when that day was. It just said on the day it was taken away. It didn't say it was that very day. It just said on the day it was taken away. It could have been any day. Praise Yahuwah. But there was no bread there except the showbread. So let's see why this is significant. In the law of the burnt offering, 1/10 of an ephah of flour, which is an omer, was mixed with oil for the daily grain offering, which was offered twice daily. You can see that from Numbers 28, verses 3 through 8. Now, in another place, it talks about how this omer was actually split up between the morning and the evening offering. And so it said the grain offering was given to the Kohanim to eat once the remembrance portion was given to Yahuwah. You could read that from Leviticus chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. On Shabbat, the burnt offering with the grain offering was doubled and performed in addition to the daily offering, with the omer of flour for both the morning and evening daily offering, and the 2 omers for the Shabbat offering. there would have been a lot of other bread present on Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. And so you have at least that half omer being offered up in the morning for the daily. You have the 2 omers being offered for the Shabbat offering. Brothers and sisters, that's a lot of bread. Praise Yah. That's what, 2.5 omers of bread. And so, brothers and sisters, that would be a lot of bread present on the Shabbat. And not only that, but check this out. It said, with 3 or 4 officiating Kohanim, or priests, eating from the showbread, the grain offerings, and possibly peace offerings, it is highly unlikely that there would be no bread there except the showbread if that day were Shabbat. That day was an ordinary day. Praise Yahuwah. So see, we didn't even mention the meat, brothers and sisters. The grain offerings, yeah, that's bread, just like showbread. But the peace offerings, this was meat, brothers and sisters. Praise Yahuwah. So let's look at this. Let's look at the peace offering. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, he who brings this peace offering to Yahuwah brings his offering to Yahuwah from the slaughtering of his peace offering. With his own hands he brings the offerings made by fire to Yahuwah. He brings the fat with the breast to be waved as a wave offering before Yahuwah. And the Kohen shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast shall be Aharon's and his sons. And the right thigh you give to the Kohen as a contribution from your peace offerings. He among the sons of Aharon who brings the blood of the peace offerings in the fat, the right thigh is his for a portion. For the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the contribution I have taken from the children of Israel, from their peace offerings, and I give them to Aharon the Kohen and to his sons as a law forever from the children of Israel. That's Leviticus chapter 7, verses 29 through 34. Now, and when the prince makes a spontaneous burnt offering or spontaneous peace offerings to Yahuwah, the gate facing east shall be open for him, and he shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings as he did on the Shabbat day. And he shall go out, and after he goes out, the gate shall be shut. That's from Ezekiel chapter 46, verse 12. This shows you that they were able to offer up peace offerings on Shabbat. Now, peace offerings were voluntary offerings, and so it was something that could take place on the Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. And I didn't even put this in my slides here, but you also have certain sin offerings. You have certain sin offerings that could have been offered on Shabbat as well. And so these sin offerings, peace offerings, they could be brought any given day of the week. And so that would add to the food supply of the Kohanim, that they would have meat to eat as well. And so the point I'm making, brothers and sisters, as we're back to our original list here, is that with the priests, 3 or 4 of them now, and being able to eat, 1 omer a day per person, with them eating from the showbread and the grain offerings, and possibly peace offerings, not to even mention sin offerings, praise Yahuwah, with all that food available for the priests to eat, especially on Shabbat, it is highly unlikely that there would be no bread there except the showbread if that day were Shabbat. Once again, brothers and sisters, that day was an ordinary day. It was late enough in the week that they would have eaten up all that food and only had showbread left to eat. Praise Yahuwah. Now, reason number 4, David traveled extensively that day, both to Nob and after departing from there. He went to Gath that day, that's in chapter 21, verse 10, then to the cave of Adullam, chapter 22, verse 1, then to Moab, chapter 22, verse 3. Now Moab, as you'll see me deal with it here, that may not have necessarily been that same day. But Gath and cave of Adullam, yes. And David rose and fled that day from before Shaul. See, that's another thing. Would Shaul have been pursuing him on Shabbat, especially if he didn't even know where he was? And went to Achish, the sovereign of Gath. It's 21 verse 10. And David went from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So we don't see a lapse in days here. And his brothers and all his father's house heard it and went down to him there. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone bitter in being gathered to him. So he became head over them, and there were about 400 men with him. So that's 22 verses 1 and 2. And David went from there to Mitzpah of Moab, and said to the sovereign of Moab, please let my father and mother come here with you, till I know what Elohim does for me. And he left them with the sovereign of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now, out of all fairness, because it says that his brothers and all his father's house heard that he was there, and they went down to him there, that there could be some time elapsing there like that. So I could see how that going to Mitzpah, Moab, that may have been on a different day. Praise Yahuwah. But definitely him going to Gath and then going to the cave of Adullam, same day. And so look at this extensive traveling, brothers and sisters. So he went to Gath that day, then to the cave of Adullam, then to Moab. And as we already said, Moab may have been on a different day, but definitely Gath and the cave of Adullam, same day. Now look at this, and this is for those of you who say, well, he's running for his life. And so that would have been allowable for him to do all that traveling on Shabbat because he's running for his life. Well, look at this. He told the Kohen that he had traveled there, sent his men away, and that he was leaving to go elsewhere. Praise Yahuwah. Now, and before I read this out of Jubilees, that the thing is, if this was a dire emergency, see, that would have been better to tell the Kohen, listen, we're doing all this traveling. I know it's Shabbat, but we're doing all this traveling because, I'm running for my life. No, he didn't indicate to the Kohen that there was any kind of dire emergency, yet he's doing all this traveling, and the Kohen knew he was doing all that traveling, and there's no rebuke. There's no reproof. Praise Yahuwah. And so if that day were Shabbat, then surely the Kohen would have said something to him, especially if he said that he was on an ordinary mission. Praise Yah. But look at what this says. Now, this is for those of you that hold Jubilees to be inspired scripture. Listen to this. And every man who does any work thereon, or goes on a journey, or tills his farm, whether in his house or any other place, or whoever lights a fire, or rides on any beast, or travels by ship on the sea, and whoever strikes or kills anything, or slaughters a beast or a bird, or whoever catches an animal, or a bird, or a fish, or whoever fasts, or makes war on the Sabbath, the man who does any of these things on the Sabbath shall die, so that the children of Israel shall observe the Sabbaths according to the commandments regarding the Sabbaths of the land, as it is written in the tablets which he gave into my hands, and that I should write out for thee the laws of the seasons, and the seasons according to the division of their days. Jubilees chapter 50, verses 12 and 13. So going on a journey. David went on a few journeys that day. He went on the journey to Nob, the city of priests, then went on a journey to Gath, then went on a journey to the cave of Adullam. Here it says that a man who goes on a journey, the man who does any of these things on the Shabbat shall die. Praise Yahuwah. How come the Kohen did not say to Daud, listen, yeah, you're journeying on Shabbat, you're worthy of death. Going on an ordinary mission, you're worthy of death. You see, why did the Kohen warn him about that? The Kohen did not warn him about that because that day was not Shabbat. It was an ordinary day. Praise Yahuwah. And just to put another nail in the coffin of the idea that, well, yeah, because he was running for his life, that then it was okay for him to do all that traveling on Shabbat. Remember what Yahusha said. Praise Yah. Because see, we got to be careful about saying that this is allowable and that's allowable, and whatever we say is allowable, we need 2-3 witnesses on that, especially something as serious as the Shabbat. It's like people saying the Jericho March, well, Yah told them to do it, so it's okay. Well, where's a second witness of Yah telling them to do something like that on the Shabbat? Praise Yahuwah. So we can't just throw something out there like that. We need witnesses because we don't want to be wrong when it comes to Shabbat and thinking that we can do something and then we find that we can't. Praise Yahuwah. And so, brothers and sisters, think about what Yahusha said about, when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel talked about, standing where it ought not, then, let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains. Praise Yah. Now, Yahusha said, flee. All right. Yahusha gives a command, but what else did he say? He said, pray that your flight take place, neither in the wintertime nor on Shabbat. Well, why would it even matter if it happened on Shabbat? Praise Yah. Didn't Yahusha give the command to flee? Praise Yah. So it shows you how the strictness of the Sabbath, for even Yahusha to say, pray that your flight does not take place on the Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. And so that's so we won't be too loose about saying that this is okay to do, or that's okay, or this situation is okay on Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah, with Yahusha saying that. So no, the fleeing for the life doesn't work because of his conversation with the Kohen. It doesn't square up with that. Praise Yahuwah. That day was an ordinary day. That day was not Shabbat. Daud would not have done all that traveling, extensive traveling, on the Shabbat. Now, reason number 5. When Yahusha mentioned David eating the showbread and connected it with the Talmudim eating, rubbing heads of grain in their hands and eating it on Shabbat, the connection he was making was to the alleged unlawful eating when hungry, in both cases, and not to Shabbat. So, brothers and sisters, this is the second pillar of this debunked doctrine, this doctrine that claims to debunk the Shabbat counted by the luminaries by finding a Shabbat that David supposedly ate the showbread on, that this is the second pillar. The first pillar is just the idea that he ate showbread that day, so that day had to be Shabbat, because apparently some people think that the showbread looked like those 2 stacks of pancakes that I showed you. Praise Yah, and that the priest would have just eaten them all up, and there wouldn't have been any showbread left for David and his men if it was after the Shabbat. Well, I demonstrated to you that that's not true. And that extra point that I wanted to make to you, brothers and sisters, was that David asked for 5 ordinary loaves. Remember now, the showbread was twice as big as a normal loaf. Now, a normal loaf would have been 1 omer. Praise Yah. So David asking for basically 5 omers, that his needs would have been met with 2.5 pieces of showbread. There wouldn't have needed to be 5 loaves of showbread left for David and his men. Only 2.5 loaves in order to supply David with the amount that he was asking for, because he wasn't asking for loaves of showbread. He was just asking for normal loaves, 5 normal loaves, which equivalent would have been 2.5 loaves of showbread. So we're talking that it could have been middle to late week in order for enough showbread to be left to supply David and his men. Praise Yah. But let's take a look at this. So that's the first pillar, is that David could only take that much showbread on the Shabbat. Otherwise, it would have gotten eaten up by the priest. Well, I demonstrated to you that is not true. This is the second pillar. The second pillar is that what these brethren believe that teach this. They believe that because that Yahusha mentioned David in the context of his Talmudim being accused of breaking Shabbat, that must mean that Daud did what he did on Shabbat. Well, let's read through it and see if that's the case, brothers and sisters. At that time, Yahusha went through the grain fields on the Shabbat, and his Talmudim were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your Talmudim are doing what is not right to do on the Shabbat." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he went into the house of Elohim and ate the showbread, which was not right for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the Kohanim." You'll find that in Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. Compare that to Mark 22, 23 through 28, and Luke 6, 1 through 5. So this is what Yahusha actually said. Now, back to reason number 5, when Yahusha mentioned David eating the showbread and connected it with the Talmudim, the disciples, rubbing heads of grain in their hands and eating it on Shabbat, the connection he was making was to the alleged unlawful eating when hungry in both cases, and not to Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. And so that's not the connection that Yahusha was making. The similarity was the Talmudim were hungry, they rubbed the grains and ate them on Shabbat. Daud was hungry, he partook of bread which he was not supposed to partake of. Praise Yahuwah. So it was the fulfilling of the hunger. That's the connection he was making. The fulfilling of the hunger in a way that could have been perceived as unlawful or unrighteous by others, but wasn't condemned of Yah. That was the point Yahusha was making. Praise Yahuwah. Nowhere did he say that Daud did that on the Shabbat. So here's a summary, brothers and sisters, of 5 reasons why David did not eat the showbread on the Shabbat. Reason number 1, the lie that David told the Kohen Hagadol would not have been believable if that day was Shabbat. Reason number 2, the showbread was available during the week and not just Shabbat. There would have been enough showbread well into the following week to supply David with 5 loaves, especially when David only asked for 5 regular loaves, which would have been the equivalent of 2.5 pieces of showbread. Praise Yahuwah. Reason number 3, there was no bread except for the showbread. Such a case would be highly unlikely on Shabbat because of the availability of bread from extra grain offerings. Praise Yahuwah. And as we said in that section, brothers and sisters, not just the bread, but look at what else that could have been at their disposal. Could have been peace offerings, could have been sin offerings. They had quite a bit to eat from. Praise Yahuwah. And so it was more likely, brothers and sisters, that it was later in the week when they ate up all that Shabbat bread, and then they would just eat the daily bread that was commanded to be supplied for them on a day-to-day basis. Praise Yahuwah. Reason number 4, David traveled extensively that day. And not just that, but the Kohen knew it. The Kohen knew it, didn't say anything to him about it. No rebuke, no reproof. Praise Yahuwah. David didn't give him any indication that he was running for his life. And so because of that, brothers and sisters, that was an ordinary day that David did all that extensive traveling on with the priest knowing it and not saying anything about it. And then number 5, Yahusha connected the alleged unlawful eating of the Talmudim when hungry to that of David and the showbread. He made no mention of Shabbat in regard to David's eating. That wasn't the point that he was trying to make, brothers and sisters. Praise Yahuwah. The point was the alleged unlawful eating when hungry. That's what the Talmudim and David had in common. So, brothers and sisters, when you look at these reasons, there may not be one particular reason that would convince you, but if you stack all 5 of these reasons on top of one another, then you can see that, brothers and sisters, that was an ordinary day that David ate the showbread. It was not Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. Now, conclusion. I'm not here to teach you what to think, but rather how to think. Praise Yahuwah. Now, this is my methodology of teaching, and this is my methodology because I see that this is YAHUSHA'S methodology. That if you ask the right questions, you will get the right answers. See, this is how to think. This is not what to think. This is how to think. This is something that will help you in your future studies, in your seeking of truth. Praise Yahuwah. Ask the right questions and you'll get the right answers. The reason why the debunk on this subject fails, praise Yah, this is the reason why the debunk on this subject fails. Conclusions are drawn too soon while leaving too many unanswered questions. Like I said, the 2 pillars of this teaching is that David ate showbread that day. The showbread is changed out on the Shabbat. Therefore, that day had to be Shabbat when David ate the showbread. That's the first pillar. And the second pillar is because David was mentioned in the context of a Sabbath controversy, that must mean that David ate the showbread on the Sabbath. Well, brothers and sisters, that we brought down both of those pillars and show that they just do not stand. But the reason why they don't stand is because there's too many unanswered questions surrounding those events. There's so many moving parts to that whole event. Praise Yahuwah. And that's why this debunk fails. And not just this debunk, but all of the so-called lunar Sabbath debunks, all of them fail for the same reason. They follow the same pattern. Conclusions are drawn too soon while leaving too many unanswered questions. Do not go forth to strive in haste, for what would you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame? Proverbs 25, verse 8. Praise Yahuwah. And if you're a brother, a moray, or somebody who calls himself debunking the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, I'm not throwing shade on you. I'm not trying to put you down, because I want you to know I've been in your shoes. I've walked in your shoes. About 25 years ago is when I first heard about the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, and it was the most loony thing I had ever heard of at that time. I definitely thought people that kept it were Looney Tunes. Praise Yah. That it was, and I heard about it from some people that lived in the backwoods of Arkansas. So of course, my thinking is that, these people are just so out of touch with reality and whatnot. How come everybody else, keeps the Shabbat like I keep it, and they keep it this wonky way? Praise Yah. And so I opposed it. I vehemently opposed the lunar Shabbat about 25 years ago, 25 years ago, 2001, 2002. And all these debunks that you brothers come with, I came with the same ones. I came with 4th day creation, moon created on the 4th day, Sabbath on the 7th day. I came with the 3 days journey, Numbers chapter 10, starting on the 20th, 3 days journey. I came with that one too. I came with the man account. All right. that, I mean, all the debunks. Now, this David and the Showbread, this is more of a recent one. I didn't come with that one, but all the rest of the debunks y'all come with, I came with the same ones. People used to come to me and say, brother, I ran across some people that keep that lunar Sabbath. Do you have some scriptures I could use to counter them? And I would give them scriptures to counter them crazy lunar Sabbath folks, because I was a lunar Sabbath debunker. Praise Yahuwah. And I'm going to just give you a short testimony. You know, I thought I was right. And so I left it alone for a number of years. And I remember that there was a particular ministry I was a part of that I left in 2010. And, you know, when I left and I started searching for fellowship, you know, me and my wife, and you know, we were reaching out to others and getting to know people just through Facebook and connecting with other brothers and sisters. And one of the brothers who I had connected with, I saw him in a conversation online with a sister that was sharing the Shabbat counted by the luminaries with him. And I jumped in that conversation, guns fully loaded. I said, man, I'm going to tear this woman up. You know, I'm going to show her how false that lunar Sabbath is. And so I jumped in and I started with my spiel. And this woman had a real meek spirit about her. She said, you know, brother, just please keep an open mind. Let me share something with you. Take a look at this and just, you know, see what you think. And she just dropped a link to me and she didn't argue with me. So she showed me there she had a good spirit. Praise Yah. But I followed the article and came across some people that really knew what they were talking about with this Shabbat. And as I studied into what they were saying, and not just that, but there's other people I would listen to on the radio over the years that would talk about the Shabbat counted by the luminaries. I didn't agree with them, but I was curious, and I heard them out. I heard what they had to say. And these people from this link that I visited were saying a lot of the same things. And what I found, brothers and sisters, was that I had to humble myself, and I had to admit that every single debunk that I thought I had against the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, every single one of those debunks failed for the reasons that I'm telling you about right now. I drew conclusions too soon, and I left too many unanswered questions. Praise Yahuwah. Well, I came across seasoned people that were able to answer those unanswered questions, and I had to humble myself. I had to humble myself and admit that the debunks that I thought I had were not debunks. And so that is about the time that I had accepted the truth about the Shabbat. Praise Yahuwah. And I had to accept that I was going forth hastily to strive, and then ended up being put to shame in the end. And another reason, before I go on, brothers and sisters, is that I gave you examples earlier of how the true Shabbat actually works itself out in the scripture. And there's more examples. But where I was with the traditional Jewish Shabbat, the perpetual 7-day count, that I couldn't give, and that's one thing that I remember was I couldn't give people one example in the scriptures of the Shabbat being counted that way. I couldn't give one. You know, people who kept the Shabbat counted by the luminaries, they were able to give several examples. I could not give one example. I could not give positive proof of this rabbinical Jewish Shabbat every 7 days mathematically. I could not give positive proof of it, brothers and sisters. I couldn't give people one example. Praise Yah. And so that's why I changed. Praise Yahuwah. But back to what I was saying about asking the right questions and getting the right answers. Let's consider the right questions that were answered in this video. Praise Yahuwah. Because, you know, we're told in Proverbs 2 that if we want to find the knowledge of Yah, we got to dig for it like silver and gold. Well, this is how you do it, brothers and sisters. So consider this. Now, how much flour went into each piece of showbread? How many people ate of it? How much can one man typically eat in one day? What else did the Kohanim have to eat? How much bread would need to have been eaten in order for there to be no bread left but showbread if that day were Shabbat? How much showbread would need to have been left in order to fulfill David's request? Brothers and sisters, do you see just how beneficial it is to ask a lot of questions and to ask a lot of the right questions? Praise Yahuwah. I would venture to say there are some of you watching this video that you had no idea of some of these things until you watched this video. Praise Yahuwah, but now you know. Now, more questions, right questions that were answered in this video. Was the lie that David told the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, was that lie believable? Did David make any indication to the Kohen that he was in an emergency situation that would warrant traveling on Shabbat? Would the Kohen not reprove David if he thought that he was journeying on Shabbat without a valid excuse? Would David do all that extensive traveling on Shabbat, even if on the run? Praise Yahuwah. Like I said, this is the Shabbat. Why not just hide out like he was hiding out when he was connecting with Jonathan? Praise Yahuwah. Would he have done all that extensive traveling on Shabbat? All right, and finally, when Yahusha made reference to David and the showbread, what activity did he highlight? What did that have to do with what the Talmudim were doing? What did these activities have in common? Was the common denominator alleged unlawful eating or the Shabbat? Did Yahusha mention the Shabbat in connection with David and the showbread? Did he even mention it? Did he say anything about Shabbat? See, these were all the questions that we asked in order to unearth the truth about this matter, brothers and sisters. And see, this is how you can unearth the truth on any matter. See, I gave you the sauce, brothers and sisters. Praise Yahuwah. All you got to do, you got to ask enough of the right questions in order for you to get the right answers. Praise Yahuwah. And as I said before, see, this is where people get in trouble, striving hastily, and here's the thing. I'm going to say this also. Praise Yah, because it was true of myself 25 years ago. Praise Yahuwah. But to you brethren that call yourself lunar Sabbath debunkers, praise Yahuwah, this is your problem. I know this is your problem because this was my problem. Praise Yahuwah. You're looking for the debunk. You're not looking for the truth. Let me say it again. You're looking for the debunk. You're not looking for the truth. Praise Yahuwah. And the way I know that is because you'll look into a passage of scripture just like I did. And when you think you found a debunk, you'll stop there. You won't go any further. Praise Yahuwah. When there's more to dig up, there's more to go in that passage, but you'll stop short. You'll stop prematurely and declare victory. Say you got a debunk. Praise Yahuwah. Then someone like me comes along, praise Yah, and tells the rest of the story. Praise Yahuwah. And then the truth comes out. Like I said, that happened to me. That's why I know that's true. That happened to me. Praise Yahuwah. Because every man who's first in his own cause, he seems just, but then his neighbor comes and searches him. When I would go around and tell people, and I would debunk the lunar, and people would say, wow, brother, man, that's profound. Yeah, brother, wow, that's good, brother, that's good. I seemed just. Man, I seemed like I was right to people who I would bring my debunks to. But you know what happened? My neighbor came and searched me out. Praise Yahuwah. And when I was searched out, brother, I was weighed in the balance and found wanting. And I had to humble myself. Praise Yahuwah. So I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you, brethren. I want to encourage you, mores. Praise Yahuwah. To just prove all things. Hold fast that which is good. That seek the truth. Don't seek the debunk. Seek the truth. Even when you think you found a debunk. That make sure that there's no stone unturned in whatever situation you're looking into, whatever passage that you're looking into. Praise Yahuwah. Prove all things. Hold fast that which is good. Praise Yahuwah. Well, Todah for taking the time to go all the way through this video. Praise Yahuwah. So please like and share this video and be on the lookout for more. And with that, I will say, Shalom.